upon pulque or mezcal, a strong spirit, and were stumbling along in great glee. We came up to an old church that looks like a bird's nest amongst the trees, and stands at the outskirts of the city. Here, it is said, His Majesty of Michoacán came out to meet his Spanish ally when he entered this territory. Pascuaro is a pretty little city with sloping roofs, situated on the shores of the lake of the same name, and in front of the little Indian village of Janicho, built on a beautiful small island in the midst of the lake. C n says that Pascuaro resembles a town in Catalonia. It is entirely unlike any other Mexican city. We made a great sensation as we entered with our lancers and mules, tired and dust becovered as we were, and brought all the Pascuaranians to their balconies. We passed churches bearing the date of 1580. We went to the largest and best house in the town, that of Don Miguel H.A., a friend of Colonel Y's. He was from home, but we were most hospitably entertained by his wife, who received us without any unnecessary ceremony or compliments, and made us quite at home. We walked out with her by moonlight to see the square and the Portales, which is a promenade in the evening, and were followed by crowds of little boys, strangers being rather an uncommon spectacle here. The only foreign lady, Doña says, whoever was here in her recollection, was a Frenchwoman, to whom she was very much attached, the daughter of a physician, and whose husband was murdered by the robbers. This morning, the weather being cold and rainy, and our quarters too agreeable to leave in any violent haste, we agreed to remain until to morrow, and have spent a pleasant day in this fine large house with Doña and her numerous and handsome children. We have not been able to visit the lake or the Indian Islands on account of the weather, but we hope to do so on our return from Uruapa, our next destination. Our hostess is a most agreeable person, lively, kind-hearted, and full of natural talent. We did not expect to meet such a person in this corner of the world. The first bishop of Michoacán, Vasco de Quiroga, who died in Uruapa, was buried in Pascuaro, and the Indians of this state still venerate his memory. He was the father and benefactor of these Tarrascan Indians, and went fast to rescue them from their degraded state. He not only preached morality, but encouraged industry amongst them, by assigning to each village its particular branch of commerce. Thus one was celebrated for its manufacture of saddles, another for its shoes, a third for its bateos, painted trays, and so on. Every useful institution of which some traces still remain amongst them is due to this excellent prelate, an example of what one good and zealous and well-judging man can effect. We have been taking another stroll by moonlight, the rain having ceased. We have lingered over a pleasant supper, and have wished Doña good night. Yet let me not forget, before laying down my pen, to celebrate the excellence of the white fish from the lake, so greatly surpassing in excellence and flavour those which we occasionally have in Mexico. These, no doubt, must have constituted the provisions which, according to tradition, were carried by regular running posts from Tzintzontzan to Montezuma's palace in Mexico, and with such expedition that though the distance is about 100 leagues, they were placed, still smoking, on the emperor's table. Uruapa, 30th. We went to mass at 6 o'clock, and then took leave of the Señora H.A., who gave us a cordial invitation to spend some days with her on our return. It was about 8 o'clock when we left Pascuaro, and mounted the hills over which our road lay, and stopped to look down on the beautiful lake, lying like a sheet of silver in the sun, and dotted with green islands. Two disagreeable personages were added to our party. Early in the morning, intelligence was brought that a celebrated robber, named Morales, captain of a large band, had been seized along with one of his companions, and permission was requested to take advantage of our large escort, in order that they may be safely conducted to Uruapa, where they are to be shot, being already condemned to death. The punishment of hanging is not in use in Mexico. The first thing, therefore, that we saw on mounting our horses was the two robbers chained together by the leg, guarded by 5 of our lancers, and prepared to accompany us on foot. The companion of Morales was a young vulgar looking ruffian, his face livid, and himself nearly naked; but the robber captain himself was equal to any of Salvator's brigands, in his wild and striking figure and countenance. He wore a dark coloured blanket and a black hat, the broad leaf of which was slouched over his face, which was the colour of death, while his eyes seemed to belong to a tiger, or other beast of prey. I never saw such a picture of fierce misery. Strange to say, this man began life as a shepherd, but how he was induced to abandon this pastoral occupation we did not hear. For years he has been the scourge of the country, robbing to an unheard of extent, so that, whatever he may have done with them, tens of thousands of dollars have passed through his hands, carrying off the farmers' daughters to the mountains, and at the head of 80 ruffians committing the most horrible disorders. His last crime was murdering his wife in the mountains, the night before last, under circumstances of barbarity too shocking to relate, and it is supposed assisted by the wretch now with him. After committing the crime, they ran to hide themselves in an Indian village, as the Indians probably from fear never betray the robbers. However, their horror of this man was so great that perfect hate cast out their fear, and collecting together they seized the ruffians, bound them, and carried them to Pascuaro, where they were instantly tried and condemned to be shot, the sentence to be executed at Uruapa. The sight of these miserable wretches, and the idea of what their feelings must be, occupied us as they toiled along, each step bringing them nearer to their place of execution, and we could not help thinking what wild wishes must have sometimes throbbed within them, of breaking their bonds, and dashing away from their guards, away through the dark woods, over mountain and river, down that almost perpendicular precipice, over the ravine, up that green and smiling hill, and into these gloomy pine woods, in whose untrod recesses they would be secure from pursuit; and then their despair, when they felt the heavy, clanking chain on their bare feet, and looked at the lances and guns that surrounded them, and knew that even if they attempted to fly, could they be insane enough to try it, a dozen bullets would stop their career for ever. Then horror and disgust at the recollection of their savage crimes took the place of pity, and not even blank suggestion that the robber chief might have killed his wife in a transport of jealousy, could lessen our indignation at this last most barbarous murder of a defenceless woman. But these thoughts took away half the pleasure of this most beautiful journey through wild woods, where for leagues and leagues we met nothing but the fatal cross, while through these woods of larches, cedars, oaks, and pines, are bright vistas of distant pasture fields and of lofty mountains covered with forests. Impossible to conceive a greater variety of beautiful scenery, a greater waste of beauty, if one may say so, for not even an Indian hut was to be seen, nor did we meet a single passing human being, nor a trace of cultivation. As we came out of the woods, we heard a gun fired amongst the hills, the first token of human life that had greeted us since we left Pascuaro. This, Señor told us, was the signal gun usually fired by the Indians on the approach of an armed troop, warning their brethren to hide themselves. Here the Indians rarely speak Spanish, as those do who live in the neighbourhood of cities. Their language is chiefly the harmonious Tarrascan. Towards the afternoon we came to a path which led us into a valley of the most surpassing beauty, entirely carpeted with the loveliest blue, white, pink, and scarlet wild flowers, and clothed with natural orchards of peach and apricot trees in full bloom, the grass strewed with their rich blossoms. Below ran a sparkling rivulet, its bright gushing waters leaping over the stones and pebbles that shone in the sun like silver. Near this are some huts called Las Palomas, and it was so charming a spot that we got off our horses and halted for half an hour, and while they prepared breakfast for us, a basket of provisions from Pascuaro having been brought on by the provident care of Doña , We clambered out amongst the rocks and luxuriant trees that dipped their leafy branches in the stream, and pulled wild flowers that would grace any European